Hello everyone, welcome back to D Squared Stories, an audio fiction podcast bringing you short serialized weekly stories. Well, at least that's what we normally do. This week, as a hiatus from our multiple chapter stories, I will be presenting the first volume of what I'm calling The Cutting Room Floor. The name, derived from the expression referring to parts of movies that don't make the final cut, applies here, as these are all ideas that I had that I couldn't quite stretch out into a multi-chapter story. The theme for Volume 1 is about the double-edged sword of our fast-evolving technology. This first story takes place in the distant future, where body augmentation technology has advanced beyond our wildest dreams, for those who can afford it at least. We follow Narcissa and Icarus, an odd couple who use this technology to its fullest extent. Without any further ado, let's get into our first story, titled Augmented Reality. Narcissa sipped her coffee as she traipsed across the house in her silk robes. She sat down in her dressing room, one of the many rooms in her mansion. She sat across from a high-tech smart mirror, called the Vanity 2.0. The mirror immediately scanned Narcissa's face and identified her by name, as it booted up a menu like one that might show on a tablet or computer software. Narcissa lifted a helmet onto her head and seemed to lock it into unseen magnets in her skull. She then pulled a long, thick cord from underneath her humming furniture and plugged it into the back of her neck. She swiped through some of the menus on her screen, before landing on one that said, Previous Looks. She clicked on it, and a handful of different photos of her with timestamps came up. She clicked on one that was labeled Daddy's Inauguration. A photo of Narcissa and her father at the governor's swearing-in ceremony appeared. She stood next to her father and a woman around her age who seemed to be holding his hand. In this photo, Narcissa had short brown hair, hazel eyes, and was average build. Narcissa in this photo seemed almost a stranger to the woman at the desk who sported long curly blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and a slender body. Even on close inspection, it could be seen that her hands were slightly smaller than that in the photo, along with her jaw as well. Narcissa shook her head. She swiped over to a different photo, labeled Techno Wrestling World Appearance. In this, the Narcissa at the time had incredibly broad shoulders, dark brown eyes, and absurdly muscular biceps to the point of seeming unnatural. She chuckled and continued swiping. The next one, a nondescript event titled Gala, she seemed to pause on. She was redhead in this one, back to a more slender frame, more hourglass-shaped, and significantly taller than in the other ones. She tapped a button on the screen, then hit a larger one. She grimaced slightly as the machine whirred and the cables made a grinding sound, like stiff gears. Suddenly her body morphed as she almost bent out of shape, stretching out to be taller. Her hair remained the same, but her facial features, clearly looking a bit older than she did in the photo, were rearranged by the helmet. She let out a deep breath as her transformation was complete. She then swiped again along the screen, pulling up a sort of browser in it. She scanned through gossip magazine headlines to see various photos of models. She seemed to study them all deeply. After a while, she pulled up her own screen again and started to hone in on some of her attributes. She made her lips fuller, her eyelashes longer. She adjusted the thickness of her thighs to match the approximate width of the latest physiques of the models. As she did this, a man with messy brown hair and a scruffy short beard walked into the room. He wore a tank top and shorts. He was slightly glistening, as if still a little sweaty from working out. This was reinforced by his muscular arms, which seemed to swell from active use. Though perplexingly, his right arm seemed to swell slightly less than his left, and almost seemed rigid. He smirked with a devilish grin as he walked over behind Narcissa. He raised his hand to the screen and selected a few things, and then hit a large button. Narcissa rolled her eyes as she could feel the machine working on her again as she felt her chest expanded to fill her robe. She went back up to the screen and pressed a few buttons to undo the change. "That's not quite in season right now, Icarus," she said. "The past couple of years, C or even D cups are popular around the winter months, but in the summer months, most models are augmenting to a B cup." Icarus cackled. "What's the deal with that? What's the point of having a big rack outside of bikini season? Do you heartless harpies care nothing for us men and our hungry eyes?" "Humph. We don't change our appearance to suit men. We change it to empower ourselves, and to show autonomy over our bodies. To be happy with ourselves and how we look." Right. I've heard it all before, Susan B. Anthony," he said. "You keeping the blonde hair? You've had it for quite a while now." She took another sip from her coffee as she went back to perusing more photos of models, zooming in closer on their faces to study any other expressions she needed to emulate. "It's considered quite tacky to change your hair now," she said. "We were all doing it for a while, but the lower class got obsessed with it. Hair dyes and wigs are far too affordable, and we can't be letting them think that they can achieve what we can at such a low cost. Our trends and looks need to be unattainable to them. Icarus zoned out, staring at the models on the screen, but groaned as Narcissa zoomed in, cutting their bodies out of each photo. Whatever. It's your modeling and your old man's money that pays for this place and its toys. Who am I to complain? Narcissa's brow furrowed a bit in frustration as she examined the face of the model she had up on the screen. She went back to her own screen and punched in a few adjustments. She groaned in pain as her eyebrows got moved up and her forehead started to shrink down. It barely moved less than half an inch as she grunted and the screen displayed a red error message. Darn it, darn it, darn it, she said, slamming her fist into the chair. Hey, what are you doing? He asked. We've been over this. That's as small as your forehead can go without your skull crushing your brain. I don't get what your deal is. It's smaller than average. It's not as small as hers. She pointed out at the woman on the screen in front of them. Icarus looked at the photo and then back to her. I think they're about the same. Barely a difference, if anything, he said. Remember what that psychiatrist quack said. Just lower your bangs or move your eyebrows up to split the difference. Don't go getting yourself sent back to the doctor again over this. Narcissa just stared in agony at the model in the photo and at her own reflection shown next to it. After a few moments of tense silence, Icarus's shoulders started to ring. He raised his hand up to it and pressed a button. Icarus speaking. Who's calling? He asked. Icarus, this is Jason. We have a lead on where the stolen Augmented has ended up. Icarus turned to Narcissa, who shook her head. Sorry, Jay. Not a great time. The Dame has an important movie premiere tonight. I am expected to be in attendance. You know how it is, keeping with appearances. We have the exact coordinates of the suspected safe house. It should be a fairly quick mission. Narcissa continued shaking her head. Icarus just sighed. Before he could respond, Jason added, It's not a capture situation. The higher-ups want these thieves obliterated. A message sent. We are willing to re-enable all the features of your auto-assassin. Icarus almost seemed to salivate at these words. A kind of bloodlust filled his eyes as they glazed over, hiding the fantasy of his bloody slaughter in his head behind them. He beamed ear to ear, and he looked back at Narcissa pleading. She just sighed and shrugged. She knew there was no use getting through to him when he had these types of offers. Plus, she knew if they were willing to re-enable his auto-assassin after what happened last time, it meant they even ran it by her father and his associates. This meant this mission was important to them, and she did not want to keep her father from what he wanted. Well, what are you waiting for? Turn this bad boy back on. I'm in, he said. He held out his right arm and looked on in wonder as it whirred back to life, and a sharp blade protruded from the end of it. Metal buttons and gears now stuck out from the mechanical arm, and he toyed with them, each one reconfiguring the arm to a new type of attachment. He ran over and out of the room, coming back in with a bag that was filled to the brim with ammunition and other equipment compatible with the arm, all that he kept to be ready at a moment's notice. Oh yeah, he said. My baby's back. Where am I going and who am I eliminating? There's a small faction of so-called resistance fighters. Terrorists, really. Filthy communists who can't accept their lot in life and who want to stir up trouble by stealing from us. They're holed up in an abandoned warehouse in Olympusville. Please wipe them out as brutally as you wish. Narcissa's eyes narrowed. Olympusville? That's Icarus's hometown. Are we sure that's a good idea? Don't be ridiculous. Of course it's a good idea, he said. All the better even. Jay, tell your superiors I'll have it taken care of by noon. He tapped his shoulder and hung up the call. He went out of the room and into his own and started putting on black leather pants and a leather jacket. He grabbed his bag and put shades on as he was halfway out the door. Narcissa stood in the doorway of her dressing room to the main foyer where he was leaving. Please be careful, she said to him. The only thing I need to be careful about is that I don't have too much fun, he said before cackling. He slammed the door behind himself and got into a small metal pod-shaped chamber outside their mansion. He pressed a few buttons and the pod began to glow and levitated above the ground. He entered the coordinates for Olympusville. The pod started vaulting forward towards his destination at high speeds as he just lay back in the pod with a satisfied grin. I know the old warehouse he was talking about. A hunk of junk of a building. With the auto-assassin fully re-enabled, I'm going to see if I can raise that thing to the ground. After only a few minutes of high-velocity pod travel, he managed to arrive at a back road by a fence. The fence was decaying and hung open, a relic from when the warehouse used to have active employees and truck drivers coming in each day. Icarus hopped out of his pod and stretched his body out, still smiling with wicked excitement. He heard some rustling from a nearby trail that seemed to cross right before the entrance to the warehouse complex. After seeing it was a jogger, he paid it no mind. However, the voice called out to him. "Whoa, Icarus," he said. "I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but it really is you." He turned and just stared coldly at the man a couple years older who stopped by him. "Am I supposed to know who you are?" he asked. The man, seeming taken aback a bit by this, stepped back and looked nervous. "Yeah, I was friends with your older brother, Daedalus." Icarus's eyes lit up with a furious and threatening glare. Within an instant, the jogger found himself with a cold metal hand around his throat and pressed up against a tree. He had hardly seen Icarus take a step, but the propulsion of his right arm closed the gap between them in an instant, as he risked crushing the man's windpipe with the force of his grip. The man weakly struggled and squirmed, unable to even get close to freeing himself from this. "Don't speak that name to me ever again," he said. He released the man from his grasp, and the jogger immediately started running away from him, heaving and gasping heavily. Icarus's eye still twitched a bit, but he breathed deeply to try to calm his nerves. He thought how Narcissa would have felt justified in her worry about his homecoming after seeing that. He put this thought out of his mind for now, though. He had one simple mission to take care of, and he was going to see to it. He pushed open the gate and started to walk down the decrepit road towards the warehouse. It looked every bit as abandoned as he remembered it. He remembered coming here as a teenager. It was a popular spot for young lovers, drugs, every kind of debauchery. Icarus reveled in those things in his younger years, much to the dismay of his parents. He was such a disappointment to them compared to Daedalus, who just did his studies in martial arts. Where were both of them now, though? He thought. He was a feared bounty hunter, and the husband of an heiress. Meanwhile, Daedalus had fallen off the face of the earth. Icarus had to pause as he felt himself clenching his fists, so angry and tense thinking of his upbringing. This rage blinded him as he did not notice a young boy pop up from a nearby bush. The boy was only around 19 at the oldest. He pointed a makeshift rifle at Icarus. "Freeze! No sudden movements!" Icarus hardly turned his face and just stared at the boy out of the corner of his eye. He noticed a brief, blinking red light at the end of his own wrist. "Auto assassin! Activate!" Before the boy could even process what he was hearing, Icarus's arm raised and lodged a bullet straight into his head. The propulsion of the arm also brought Icarus to the ground, to avoid any possible gunshot caused from his collapse. However, the boy had not even brought his finger to the trigger, and just fell to the ground limply. The auto-assassin then propelled Icarus back to his feet. He smirked to himself, satisfied with what his toy had done. "Well, these little miscreants are armed to the teeth, huh?" he asked. "Better take no chances, then." As he approached the warehouse, he did not bother to look around. He simply reached into his bag and loaded up some ammunition after changing the settings on the dials. He pointed his arm out towards the building and started firing. He launched these projectiles, which seemed to stick themselves into the building. After a few moments, the charges went off and the projectiles exploded into furious blasts. The building started to collapse on itself. Screams rang out from inside the building, barely audible over its loud collapse. Icarus seemed to breathe in the scene, seeming exhilarated by the situation. After a moment, though, concern grew in his expression. "Oh, nuts," he said. "Was I supposed to recover the tech?" As the building finished imploding, he put a mask over his mouth and nose to avoid inhaling any of the dust and began to walk over top of the rubble. With the immense strength of the auto-assassin, he tossed giant chunks of rubble out of the way as he searched for the stolen technology. After a while, he could hear panicked crying and screaming from one corner of the room. "Cainius! Cainius, no!" He turned his head to see a girl frantically trying to pull off a chunk of the building off another person. He clocked that she had a mechanical leg in place of her right leg. Clicking his thumb to activate the propulsion, he closed the gap between them in a second as he grabbed her by the leg and hoisted her into the air. "What's this here?" he said. "Someone survived the collapse of this building, and she has some unauthorized augment tech." She struggled as she hung upside down, desperately trying to punch into his chest, but none of her strikes had any effect on him. "Let me go! Let me go!" "Why should I let a little thief like you go? That's proprietary tech you got there, and I know you didn't pay for it." "Why should I have to pay for something I need to walk, while freaks like you pay for thousands of cosmetic changes to their body? It's unfair. You treat your body like it's a custom car. Meanwhile, we have to struggle. Poor Cainius." She sobbed, briefly just hanging still upside down as she struggled to process this grief. All he wanted was a body to match how he felt on the inside. He could even afford it, but wasn't allowed to do it because of the backwards laws here. He can't make a small adjustment to his identity, But you can turn yourself into a walking weapon? All because of what serves the powers that be? He almost had what he wanted. Icarus just cackled maniacally as he continued to hold the girl by the leg. Too bad. Life isn't fair, kid. I wanted a body to match how I felt too at one point. I used to be a scrawny weakling like yourself. I realized what you are all too stupid to, that cash is king. There's no uprooting this messed up oligarchy. You just gotta play into it to get what you want. And if you can't do that, well, that's where I come in, to take out the trash. He stuck out a blade from his auto-assassin and inched it closer and closer to her leg. She screamed in fear as he just continued laughing devilishly at her misfortune. He was about to strip her leg into pieces when suddenly he was shot square in the head with a rifle. He collapsed to the ground, head splattered into chunks. The girl barely freed herself from his grip and managed to run away. Icarus just lay there limply for a few moments. Then, the auto-assassin glowed a bright pink series of lights. It scooped up the surrounding gray matter, skull fragments, blood and skin, and scooped them back into Icarus's head once was. Wires lashed out, and seemed to use a mix of nanofibers and conductors to piece him back together again. Each bit of his head was put back in the exact configuration that it was prior to his headshot, down to the exact neural configuration. His eyes went from lifeless to crazed as he slowly was brought back to life by the auto-assassin. He cackled wildly into the air. "Oh, yeah! Nice shot, you stupid pauper!" he said. "I didn't see you there. Let's see how you do without the element of surprise." He swung his head around but froze up, nearly becoming slack-jawed from the person he saw standing a few meters away. A rather clean-cut, older version of Icarus, with glasses on his face, seemed to stare back at him. Icarus, of course, knew instantly who this was. "Hello, brother," Daedalus said. "I wish I could say it was nice to see you, but looking around at what you did, well, you know I've never been very good at lying." "Auto-assassin act!" Daedalus shot Icarus in his skull again, sending fragments of blood and bone once again throughout the area. Though once again, the arm gathered up enough and started to rebuild him, supplementing Icarus's head with synthetic materials as needed. Daedalus looked on indifferently, patiently waiting for his brother's augmentation to repair his body. Icarus's eyes returned to life, but before he could move, Daedalus spoke again. "Please don't do anything stupid, brother," he said. "I don't have time to keep shooting you in the head, as much as I would like to." "What, afraid you'll run out of bullets?" Icarus asked. "There's no limit to how many times I can keep regenerating." Icarus knew this was a blatant lie. The auto-assassin could heal fractures, open wounds, even nerve damage repeatedly with ease. Hits to the head like this, though, at best, the auto-assassin was only good for 5 or 6 more repairs of this magnitude. Icarus put on a brave face, though, as he scowled at his brother. "Typical," Icarus said after no response. "You always thought you were better than me. Mom and Dad always thought you were better than me, but look at me now!" Daedalus scoffed. "Look at you now. You're a petty gun for hire for some of the most corrupt and disgusting people in the country. You mutilated your body. You killed tens of innocent people who were holding up in this building, just trying to survive in this harsh world your masters created." "Too bad. You're just angry your natural talent can't keep you better than me anymore." Icarus flicked something on his arm and outstretched it towards Daedalus. Before Daedalus could fire his weapon, flames shot out of Icarus's arm. Daedalus jumped backwards, diving out of the way of the flames. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Icarus propel himself diagonally to get behind Daedalus. Then, he launched himself again towards his brother. In what felt like an instant, Icarus's momentum was halted as Daedalus delivered a powerful strike to his chin. Icarus went rolling forward as he lost sight of his brother from the severity of the hit. "Don't lie to yourself, brother. You were no less talented than I was, maybe even more so. You never liked anything that didn't come easy to you, though. Anything that required hard work and effort, you abandoned it in favor of doing what's easy. It seems now you still do." Icarus slammed his fist into the ground. "I don't need your stupid hard work. I have all the power I could ever hope to have now. Auto-assassin, activate!" Daedalus tensed up as within a flash, Icarus was in front of him. Daedalus ducked below a swipe that would have lacerated his neck. He then rolled to avoid a strike that would have crushed his skull. Icarus's mechanical arm left a small crater in the ground as it struck it with high speed and force. Daedalus staggered up to his feet before 3 gunshots rang out from the arm. Daedalus moved to have his side face his brother, minimizing the area for the bullets to hit, but one still managed to clip his shoulder. The pain seemed immense, but Daedalus exhaled deeply and seemed to shrug it off for the moment. Suddenly, with his other arm, as the auto-assassin seemed to reload his bullets, Daedalus struck at the device with his palm. Icarus went falling backwards as the force of the strike seemed to cause the device to falter slightly and jam while reloading the bullets. Icarus maintained composure, though, as his arm went swinging back towards his brother with blade outstretched. With a rock he clutched while rolling onto the ground, Daedalus struck upwards, smashing the rock into the flat side of the blade, snapping the razor-thin metal. Icarus, letting his body still be led by the device, continued swinging left and right, aiming straight for his brother's throat. However, something seemed to be different now. Daedalus was just carefully stepping backwards and out of range. Each swipe of the blade missed him by a few inches, as if the device was unaware that half of its sword had been shattered, and it no longer had the same range it once did. After a handful of misses, Icarus looked frustrated and confused. Then the auto-assassin brought itself to be raised and aimed towards Daedalus. Daedalus quickly got low, ready to dive again if needed. But as he suspected, the arm jammed up as it failed to fire the bullets that got dislodged while it was reloading. "What did you do?" Icarus yelled. Daedalus stepped forward, plucking the half of the blade he detached from the ground as he moved in and struck his brother in the throat with a fist. Icarus staggered backwards and then was tackled by his brother, as with one hand he held the mechanical arm down, and with the other, he struck wildly with the loose blade at the attachments in the shoulder. Icarus cried out in pain as the loud sounds of both his skin, muscle, and machinery could be heard tearing as Daedalus finally severed the connections enough for him to be able to tear out the arm outright. His brother cried in pain as Daedalus held the arm in his hand and pressed a button to finally disable its automatic movement, finally causing it to stop trying to squirm out of his arms. Daedalus carried the arm off and started to walk away. He could hear his brother's anguished cries for help behind him. Despite resisting the urge for a while, Daedalus finally looked back towards Icarus. He looked on his brother, bleeding out from his arm with pity. He stared with sad eyes. He stepped back over towards him, pressed a button on the auto-assassin. He then pointed the weapon at his brother, who stared wide-eyed. The device emitted flames, and Daedalus aimed it directly at his brother's shoulder wound, attempting to cauterize the wound and keep him from bleeding out. "You thief! You arrogant bastard!" Icarus cried out. "You could never, ever just let me be better than you! You're never satisfied until you've humiliated me!" "You humiliate yourself, brother," he said. "You're a warrior who can't even notice when his own weapon is broken. One who has no backup plan when it starts to falter or malfunction. Thousands of people need implements to live their day-to-day lives, and yet even they are less dependent on their tools than you, and the one you choose to augment your body with. This augmentation makes you lazy, and that makes you weak. You lack the discipline that comes with training to become strong, and lacking that discipline makes you lack a value for human life and bodies." As he said this, Daedalus adjusted his glasses again. At some point, either through rolling or a close swipe of Icarus's blade, the left frame of his glasses appeared to have been cut free, and he was working with only clear vision in his right eye. Icarus gritted his teeth, still gasping from the strike to his windpipe, leaving him hardly able to breathe after yelling like he did. He smashed his fist into the ground, tears welling in his eyes. "If you're so smart and righteous, brother," Icarus said, "tell me what's the difference? What's the difference between me and someone who gets a hearing aid to improve their hearing? Where's the line that you're convinced I crossed so long ago? At what point do these implements go from necessary and just to cosmetic and self-indulgent?" Daedalus looked at the arm he had in his hand. He pressed a button to power it off again. He fashioned together some rope to bind his brother. He started to drag him off towards the woods, away from the rubble. After tying his brother to a tree, Daedalus strapped the auto-assassin to his own back and made his way towards the rubble to try to see if he could rescue any of the survivors of the collapse. He turned back to his brother and shrugged. "I don't claim to know the line between necessity and opulence," he said. "I just know it's an unjust world where some folk can't afford to walk and others can afford to change their bodies to allow for superhuman feats. I know it's a wrong world where some folk are denied their ability to express their true identity, while others treat their bodies like dress-up dolls, and lord it over those who could never expect to look that way naturally." He paused. "Call it naive or archaic, but I believe our bodies are blessings, part of who we are. While some people can change who they are, it shouldn't be at the click of a button, or a surgery for something purely superficial. There's something soulless about a world where we can all do that. Something downright evil about a world where only those with wealth and influence can do it." He walked off and towards the rubble, doing everything he could to recover his allies in the resistance. Icarus lunged, but was securely bound. He quietly groaned and breathed frantically in rage as he stared at his brother as he moved out of eyesight. Back at the mansion, a few hours later, Narcissa checked the time. The clock gave them only a few minutes before they would have to depart to be on time for the premiere. She stomped her foot with impatience and frustration, knowing that she should have never let her husband go on this last-minute mission. She thought of how he relished any time that he had the opportunity to inflict bloodshed. Narcissa found it vain and disgusting, but he was the only candidate so far to survive being augmented with the auto-assassin. The only to survive the surgery, while also not being immediately slain by faulty targeting system and killed by their own arm. In turn, he did not want the obscene wealth that was in store for other candidates had they survived and completed their missions. He wanted but two things: to have an opportunity to flaunt his superiority over others in a malicious way. And he wanted Narcissa. Narcissa, for the 5th time, tried to call Icarus, but the call did not go through, as if the auto-assassin was offline. She huffed. Given the circumstances, her father was all too happy to give his only daughter to a bloodthirsty killer. Narcissa knew she had little choice if she wanted to continue to live the life of wealth and connections she had. But at the same time, she hardly protested this arrangement. She could not place why, but something about being valued above wealth that rivaled what she got to experience drew her into Icarus. It almost put her on the verge of self-discovery, but the company she kept and the life she lived kept her from full actualization. Needing to not hope for the worst, Narcissa decided to find something to take her mind off this. She sat back down at the chair of her Vanity 2.0 and pulled up the menu again, putting her head back into the device. She again pulled up the photo of the model with the unrealistically small forehead. She again pushed the buttons to model herself after it. The machine began to crush her head once more, before flashing a warning that she could not continue. Narcissa angrily pressed it again, wailed in pain as it tried to crush her head repeatedly. It gave the same message. She tried again, each time, feeling more and more pain as the device tried to reshape her skull. Eventually, the machine locked out, refusing to do any more augmentations. A simple failsafe put in place kept Narcissa from trying it anymore. She removed her head from the machine. She took her forehead, completely average in size, if not slightly smaller from the attempted augmentations, and smashed it into the vanity screen. She did it over and over again, until she cracked the screen and damaged the device and bled from her forehead. She sat back in her chair, crying. She pulled out her phone and looked at herself in the reflection, hating the one thing she could not adjust to meet an impossibly set expectation. Thank you so much for listening to this story from Cutting Room Floor, Volume 1. If you enjoyed, please rate the podcast, give it a like on YouTube, or share with someone else who you think might also enjoy. You can stay up to date with Cutting Room Floor by following us on social media. That will be D2 Stories on just about any of the major platforms. Thanks again for listening, and I hope to have you listen again next week.